All right, Boo. Do you want to help me introduce this video?
Hi everyone, welcome to Rachel's studio, and in today's tutorial we're going to talk about how to paint children, and I'm going to give you some 5 tips on how to blend effectively, because that is key to getting really beautiful portraits of children. Did you like the painting I did of you, Parker?
Yes.
You want to go watch Ryan on your fire for a little bit?
Yes.
And I've been painting children for a long time, but I think the more successful attempts are often when I do a better job at blending. And I was listening to a video recently by Paint Coach, and he was saying the #1 mistake people make when they're painting children is they don't blend well. They don't blend values from lights to darks well. And it's because of the structure of children's face. They have smaller features, like their nose doesn't stick out as much, and the sockets of their eyes are not as deep. Their features are a little bit flatter, and it also makes the values in their faces more subtle as they change across the architecture of the face. So they need to be blended more than if you were painting an adult. So today we're going to learn 5 ways to blend. Let's watch me paint Parker's freckles, and I will explain a few ways that I blended in this painting to get him looking really smooth and young. So my first one that I want to share with you is a wet and wet technique, and it's for larger areas. And what I do for this technique is I wet the whole area, and then I charge in various amounts of paint consistencies, sometimes tea consistency paint, sometimes milk consistency, sometimes cream consistency. And you can check out my video on milk, tea, and cream consistencies to further understand what the heck I'm talking about if you don't know what I'm talking about. But basically, when you're using this technique, the paint just spreads softly out delicately into whatever paper area that you've moistened, and then it'll stop at the edge where it meets the dry paper. So wherever you want to keep your painting really light, by the way, or pure white, don't ever get it wet. And so if you charge in with tea consistency, you'll have really light, delicate looking blends. If you use milk consistency, they'll hold their shape a little bit more, but they'll still blend out quite a bit. And then if you use cream consistency paint, then it'll hold its shape a little bit better. Also, it depends on how wet your paper is. And I also made a video about 6 pairings of paper moisture levels paired with different amounts of water in your paint. My next technique that I want to share with you is a very classic technique that watercolor artists use a lot, and it's painting wet on dry. So you've got wet paint, either it could be tea, milk, or cream consistency paint, and you paint onto dry paper. And then what you do is you clean out your brush really quickly and go in with a damp brush and blend the edge to make the edge soft. So let's take a look at how I do that.
Here's another example where I'm going to do a little bit of a sharper edge. And a lot of times what even happens to me is I'll put this hard line in underneath the ear like you're about to see me do. And then I'll go in with a damp brush that's too wet and flood it out. And it'll leave a very tiny thin line that pushes right up against the ear. So what I do, and you're going to see me do, I rinsed out my brush there and I dabbed it off on my towel a little bit there. And then I touched it to the paper first to get excess water out, and then moved up into the line where I wanted to soften it just a little bit. So if you want to soften your line just a tiny little bit, don't have as much water on your brush. And if you want to soften something a lot, then you would use more water. Let's look at another example. I want to put a little bit more of a flush on his cheeks, and then I go in with just a fairly damp brush and just go around the edge of that little circle and blend it out and smooth it out just a little bit.
Another favorite way for me to blend is to use my scrubber. And if you're one of my students, you know I love to use a scrubber. Now, I will say, if you are going to use a scrubber, then you need to use really good watercolor paper. I would recommend Arch Cold Press watercolor paper, or Hahnemühle, the collection, takes scrubbing really well. But I use a Royal and Langnickel stiff scrubber. They have size 2, and I think their other sizes, either 4 or 8. There's a small one and a larger one. I must only use the smaller one, but it's good to have both. and you have to have good paper, but this is a great way to soften little edges that have dried kind of harshly. So let me show you.
So I'm working on paper that is dried and set. So that's important to remember. You have to let your paint dry and set, and then you go in with clean, clear water on your scrubber and you can scrub, and you might want to do just a little bit, or you might want to blend more, and so you scrub harder.
All right, for this next technique, it's a glaze technique, and it's also on dry paper. And a lot of times what happens when you're painting all these little details in children's faces, all the different colors and values, it can start looking a little blotchy, or it might start looking like a cutout, or you might want different areas of a painting to hang together a little bit better. So the way to fix that sometimes is to do a glaze over the whole area, and it'll kind of unify all the elements under that glaze that you paint. So here I'm going to use some Winsor Violet to do that.
So I've got my 3/4 oval here. It's a nice big soft brush, and everything is dry and set. So again, you want your paint to be completely dry, and that sets it so that you can go in with subsequent glazes. This is called a glaze, where I'm using very watery tea consistency paint, lots of water, just a little bit of Winsor Violet added in, and I painted it over that entire back edge of his face and lower head. And here, I just felt his skin was getting blotchy kind of everywhere, and I wanted to blend it all together a little bit. So I'm going to put a glaze of tea consistency orange. I'm using Holbein Aureolin and M-Gram Naphthol Red, and I'm painting that very tea consistency paint over the entire side of his face for the most part. And that just kind of ties it all together with an orange glaze so that it all kind of hangs together better. There's no blotchiness. And you can repeat this as many times as you need to blend things, to get them to hang together more so they're not blotchy. Another big trick to not having blotchy looking skin is to use the right paper. So I would avoid hot press if you are a beginner, or if you do use hot press, use a lot of water to blend it. Otherwise you get really blotchy. So paper really has a huge effect too on how blotchy your painting is going to look. But Arch cold press 140 pound almost blends it for you. It really just has a beautiful effect, especially if you paint on slightly damp paper, or you can use glazes like this to tie everything together.
All right, my final blending method is when you're painting something that's like a hard line or a crease. For example, Parker has creases in his neck and they're pretty sharp and delineated. You still want those to look soft though in a painting. I paint the line on dry, and then I can go back in with a damp soft brush. I like to use my 3/4 round, and I soften it with that brush. There's lots of different ways that you can do this, just like there is with all these other techniques, depending on how much water you have on your paper, how wet your paint is, how much water is in your brush. All that affects how soft the effect will be. So in this case, if you paint the line and then go right back over it with a damp brush, it'll soften a lot. Another thing that you can do is paint the line, wait maybe 20 seconds and let it kind of set a little bit, but it's still a little damp, and then go over it, and then it'll hold its shape a little bit better, but it'll still soften. And your paper will dry faster than my paper because I'm in a humid climate possibly, and you're in a drier climate. So it depends on your climate and how much paint you use to make the mark and all these factors. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial. I really had a great time talking to you about these ideas. Let me know in the comments what you would like me to do a video on. I might do another video on how to paint children. I have a big show coming up that I'm doing these big abstract acrylic beach paintings for a restaurant where I live. So I don't know if I'll do a video next week because I have a lot I have to get done for this show. So I will either see you next week or in a couple weeks. Until then, go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.